Okay, so I guess that's a challenging set of presentations. Fantastic. And I think it begs, especially perhaps Tim's last presentation, begs the obvious question that I'd like to first put to Dean, which is, you start down there and come this way. The example in both of those European cities was, and I think Tim used the expression top-down and bottom-up. How can, given that we all accept the need for change, and of course to improve is to change, so it's not a question of simply maintaining what we keep doing, how can leadership at the top help stimulate the bottom-up as well as make the plans from the top?
Wow, that's a complex question, isn't it? Look, a few things for me. One is, as Auckland, we need to have that view of what we want to become. We need to play through into that consistently. One of the other big challenges, and I touched on it, is that we have these aspirations, but they're unfunded aspirations, and nor do we quite know how to shift from status quo to that new future. So we've got to dig in a bit harder on that, and that's a leadership challenge. But it's not a big L leadership challenge. It's a challenge across you three as well. As you stimulate thinking and you give advice, it's a challenge for all of us. One of the other things that Auckland Transport's been challenged hard on is that the criticism has been we have not listened to the communities that we serve. Now that's a really interesting challenge because some of those communities don't want what you've described today. What that tells me, though, is that we've got this social licence to operate issue as an organisation, but not just Auckland Transport, many of us do. So we need to be thinking, and this was my challenge back to all of us, not just what it is that we want to achieve, but why have we got this resistance from so much of our community to what we take as needing to happen? So I do think there is a deep conversation that needs to be had, and it does need to be politically led, and from civic leadership, and from the people in this room. What is it that we want to become, and have that conversation? So if it's citizen assemblies, or if it's deliberative forums, or it's all these other tools that we have about how we take change through our communities, I'm up for that, but we need to do that because you can't get Auckland Transport to come in and drive a change to society and how we spatially plan if the communities that need to go through that process aren't willing to go there, okay? So that's the leadership challenge. It sits with every single one of us.
Anyone else want to add to the leadership question?
I would. I think it is also on leadership to be able to carry the calls to make sure that, I don't think that there's whole communities out there that don't want the vision. They might not understand. There might be individuals within the community, but we actually have to bring them on the journey because we're all gonna be in a very terrible spot if we don't start to pick up the call. So I think it's more so being able to have the conversation in a way that makes sense. I think we do have a bit of a divide in terms of climate illiteracy and how we speak about it. So I think being able to actually tell people why it's important for them to be interested and the naysayers, bringing them along, because I think for the most part, the people outside of this room get it. But it's just a matter of, we all have to just start pulling it together because we can't just go along and say, I don't want to do it. And if we're going to stick our guns and stick our foot down, we need to stick our foot down in those communities that say they don't want it and say, you're going to get it. This is what we have to do. Yeah, that's me.
I get it, okay? I get what you've said. You should try doing it and just saying, whether you like it or not, I'm going to do it to you. Because that's literally why, as an organisation, we have so much challenge. So I'm saying we need to rethink this, because doing it doesn't work and just sets up even a greater polarisation and challenge. But I won't talk any more on that one. Patrick, I see you want to go to the next question.
Yeah, I just wanted to expand on that a little bit first.
Do.
Yeah. I mean, I think we have a problem. We have a sort of crisis of expertise, right? I think a lot of the time we are asking the wrong questions in consultation, for example, because we live in an age where people, a section of the community, feel very, very strongly that they are entitled to their own facts, which can be problematic. And there are some aspects around transport and city building which require expertise and can be counterintuitive. If I can use an example from a different but aligned area, which is water provision, we don't consult the public and ask them if they would like drinking water separated from sewage. We consult them and ask them if they'd like the water treatment plant here or here. So we shouldn't be asking people whether they want safer streets based on the evidence that we know delivers safer streets. We should be asking them about questions of what sort of trees, where they should be, what colour do you want the cycle lane, rather than if. I think all of us working in the sector need to own expertise a little more firmly. But I get that can feel, especially to people with very strong views, that can feel like something's been imposed on them, and that is difficult. But the other thing is, of course, we can never get 100% support for anything. I mean, that's never going to happen. So someone has to make a decision at some point about whether there's sufficient support for something. Now, Timothy, I'd like to just throw this one to you. Because there is, it's not just people who disagree with climate change or believe there's any need to act. There's also people who are enthusiastic about it but have their own answers, right? Or have different answers than maybe we've heard tonight. And one of them is the sort of not unreasonable view that can't we just electrify all the cars and then just keep living like we are, so we don't have to change anything at all?
Yeah, happy to talk about electric cars and self-driving cars and all that nonsense, all that stuff. But let me just go back real quick to this one idea. The reason I talk about Copenhagen and Amsterdam a lot is because when people go to Copenhagen and Amsterdam and they come back to their city, whatever place that is, whether it's Auckland or somewhere else, they come back inspired, but more than inspired, they come back angry because they want to know why their city doesn't have all of that stuff. Why don't we have efficient public transportation? Why don't we have safe cycleways? Why can't my child ride their bike down the street without me being terrified that they'll be hit by a car? And so we had to think, are we a car culture? We're not a car culture because that doesn't actually exist. We're a culture that has allowed cars to permeate every aspect of our lives. And so while we've let cars come in and kind of be all of our life and our lifestyle, the only way that we get past that is to push back on this idea that we are a driving society. And we have lots and lots of models to work off of from there. And that kind of takes me to the point of electric cars. There's one thing, and one thing only, that an electric car solves, and that's tailpipe emissions. And we know that carbon is terrible. We know that PM 2.5 and 10 is really bad for our lungs, but that's the only problem it solves. A bike solves far more of those problems. Walking solves far more of those problems. A ride on a bus solves more of those problems than a car. A car still causes congestion. It still causes death and carnage, the stuff we see every year. It still causes lots of money lost in our transportation system. It's still really, really inefficient, and it's still really expensive for every household to own one or two of them as their main mode of transportation. So whether we're talking about a hybrid vehicle or a fully electric vehicle, it's not the path forward. It's not the solution. It's a bridge to get us to somewhere more sustainable, but we can't use that as the reason that we can bury our heads in the sand and forget about all the other things that will take us to a sustainable transportation system.
Thanks, Timothy. So essentially, we've got to solve all of these problems at once, right? The economic efficiency, the health and safety, and the emissions, right? Okay, now one here for you, Tiffany, I think, as our sole representative from the private sector amongst all these government bureaucrats. What role does the private sector have to play, and particularly in terms of finance and innovative ways of solving the Dean's, budget problems? Can you come to the rescue?
The rescue. There's a lot to be rescued. I think that in terms of climate finance in the private sector, you actually touched on it a bit, Dean. Really looking at the procurement process, where we're actually starting to evaluate things by carbon. How much are we actually saving in a design when it comes to carbon? And comparing that, is your design going to be most carbon efficient? Also taking a look at the way that we're constructing, the materials that we're using to construct, not just emissions, but also what's embodied. The embodiment of carbon in the materials and the construction and the buildings that we create. There's hidden cost in there, and so actually teasing that out and being really smart about the things that we're recommending in our designs. We actually have, I'm pretty sure there's a decarbonizing specialist at AT. Having folks like that actually brought up a bit to take a look at designs, making sure that they are truly teasing out how much carbon, what is your return on investment for these designs when it comes to carbon? Is it helping to decrease? Is it helping us to get to our targets? And really identifying that information, I think, will be helpful. And, private sector is advice, but you have to take the advice. So, yeah.
Dean, have you got any further thoughts on that, or other panelists?
Sorry, it was on. Look, I'm all in for thinking about how we can decarbonise, no question. And I take that as advice that we do take, actually, and I think we push the private sector to go harder on it. We're electrifying all of our fleet, which is awesome. Part of your question was, well, how do we finance some of this? Where does the capital come from? There's lots of sources. I think we'd probably go into a bit of a rabbit hole if I went down that one. But the key thing is that the discussions I've had with those that are looking to lend, particularly outside of Australia and New Zealand and from Europe, their money is following green investment. They want to know that what they're investing in is actually decarbonising and is an investment that's consistent with their values as an organisation. So I think that's a really powerful influence. I think insurance companies will eventually get there the same, and they'll be a big influence on not only what is it being built, but where it's being built. And I think these are really big, important corporate levers that can play into the future that we've had described in 2050 for us here. I agree with what Tim was saying too, just around tailpipe emissions. Electric cars will deliver us an emission reduction, but it won't give us anything on a VKT reduction. So we do need to look at that.
Tim, you've been very patient. I want to actually keep pushing this a little bit, because I know there's a school of thought. We could possibly call it the Sierra Club vision out of the States, which is a suburban, an idea of a carbon neutral suburbia. Detached houses, solar panels, battery, EV, compost. It's a high cost idea, but remember, we're already ignoring those 36% of people that can't or won't drive. So how can we avoid a future where the decarbonising drive is split or captured by the already privileged communities? Is how can we shape an equitable and faster and more economically efficient transition?
It's a really good question, Patrick. Thanks. And rare for me to sit silently for a while as well. So you got quite lucky there. I think it cuts to the heart of a few things in terms of just that critical question on how do we shape an equitable transition in the transport system and how do we ensure that happens, which is perhaps a little bit separate from the, it's not exactly a tech bro solution, but this kind of idyllic utopia where we all still have our house, our castle that is with our electric robo-taxi perhaps ferrying us to where we need to go. The critical thing there, I think, is to make sure that we are platforming and paying attention to the voices of those people for whom that system won't work. So in our decision-making process, we really need to make sure that we're including children in particular, we're including the disabled community, we're including mana whenua, we're including women, and we're making sure, is this actually the future that you want, that we're working towards? And that's going to be a critical part of developing that social license as well. If we bring people together and get a cohesive vision that most people agree with, if you ask people in general, what do you want for your community, they'll give you a different answer to what do you want for you. And so it's really important that we bring wider communities together and we sit them down and we say, what do you want for your community? And we have in that room all of these different people with all of these different needs, so they can see face-to-face and discuss face-to-face exactly what the outcomes that we're working towards look like. And so then we need to make sure then that we get the leadership and the accountability to pin our budgets to those outcomes and to pin our street design to those outcomes so that it can't be skewed later on by louder voices or wealthier voices.
Yeah, and of course we have the faster horses problem, don't we? Which comes to vision. Often if you ask people what they want a slightly better thing than what they've currently got. Transformation which means changing everything. It's an easy word to drop, right? We need to transform this, but it's a very big thing, and it can be quite scary in terms of being unimaginable or creating fearful misapprehensions. It strikes me that the way to carry people along is to just make the best choice that they can make be the obvious one. Everyone does want to get quicker and safer and quieter to wherever it is they're going, so let's make that means of doing that the obvious choice, and I think people will take it, right?
Do you want a response to that? There's a risk in saying let's move people more quickly to where they want to go. We're still framing things within kind of existing destinations and existing travel habits, and actually in that you'll quickly find that it is impossible to deliver what we're talking about. We can't both move people out of cars but also have them making the same trips more quickly. That's not a thing that we have a solution to, or it's impossibly expensive. But what does happen is instead of selling a transport vision, this faster horses problem, and saying, well, what if you changed your transport mode? The thing we need to sell is a better vision for our city and a better vision for our community. That's what we really need to get behind, right? So it's not about, are you going to get across the city faster with a one-seat ride in a tunneled rail system, for example. It's about, would you like to be able to go to your local coffee shop in a really healthy, enjoyable way where you're going to meet your neighbors along the way and you're going to have a vibrant street where the kids are playing and people are safe. And they're two very different systems, but one of them is much faster and cheaper and easier to deliver. And if you propose them both to your community, most people will say, actually, I'd like that option. I'd like the option where everybody can move around quite quickly and easily on foot or by bicycle or with public transport over shorter distances in a vibrant kind of a street environment.
Yeah. So this brings us back to land use being the other side of the coin, and housing unaffordability and transport poverty are infinitely linked, right? So we need to change. So do we have a situation? I don't know who can answer this. Are our land use policies and our transport policies sufficiently tightly linked? Is decarbonisation of the transport sector part of land use planning? Auckland Council has for years now had an overarching vision of the quality compact city, but it also subsidises growth at the fringes. So do we have an alignment between strategy and action?
Feels like it could be a question for me. I think that what we see here is part of the great debate that we're having as a community, and that is the tension between affordable housing. I'm not defending this, I'm just telling as it is. Affordable housing and access to affordable housing, transport, jobs, protecting our environment. You see this play out all the time in every decision. And it's not just in Auckland. You can go down the road to the Bay of Plenty and to the Waikato. Those same debates are taking place. So I don't think we've quite figured this one out, to be fair, Patrick. But quite clearly, my view, I think it's quite clear that the way that we plan our cities and our regions, the urban centres, the rural environments, determines, or it needs to be linked to the outcomes we want as a community, and whatever form those are. Transport systems are simply an enabler of that, okay? And so then the shape of the street, with how the cycleways work, and amongst all of that, where the footpaths go, where the public transport system fits in, that is an enabler of the outcome that we've agreed to. And what I think we've done wrong is we've taken the transport system as the end in its own right, and we've rolled out these roads and we've done this stuff, and we haven't thought about actually the land use, the outcomes perspective deeply enough. So we're left with this invidious position where we're retrofitting. That's expensive and hard, it's disruptive to communities. But the plea is, can we get the future right, which is what you've touched on when you said, have we got the link between outcomes and transport systems in place?
Yeah, Dean, I think you're spot on with that. And I would just add, I think also we've taken the people out of it. So we very much, planning for the roads and planning for the housing, but really bringing the people back into it and how they actually experience those things. Placemaking is so important, and how people, you have women that are unsafe to feel unsafe using particular systems because it just doesn't feel safe to them, and are we actually planning and designing for those situations where, you're like, oh, can I actually make this area a bit better? And then it encourages people to use it. So yeah, I think also there's housing, and also putting it on the developers to be a part of this conversation of how they create a realm that encourages people to actually use active transport as well. Yeah.
Okay. We have various questions from the room about barriers to cycling, including all the usual ones about hills and weather. I think other cities in the world both have hills and weather. Does anybody wish to discuss? Is there anything special about Auckland that means we can't do this?
In terms of cycling uptake, or well, let's quickly get it. It's a common question. It's a common perception. Is our topography, is our hills, and is our weather a barrier to cycling uptake? And I guess there's the kind of the dry statistical answer of, well, we can look at, Auckland had a very wet year this year in particular, but our cycle counters actually are almost back at where they were, or they were during the wet period in 2019. There was not a major reduction in the number of cycle trips taken in the first half of this year, despite being extremely wet. So we have a pretty good idea that, yes, it rained a lot, but that didn't put too many people off cycling. It makes a difference of around 10 to 20% if you look season to season. And hills, really, e-bikes have just cancelled the hills out. It's a new technology that means they just don't even matter. So we can also look at international examples, actually, which are perhaps more interesting. You can look at cities like Oslo or Zurich or places in Taipei and Taiwan, for example, these are all mountainous cities, and they all have much higher cycling modes here than Auckland does. So even traditionally with an acoustic bicycle, hills are not a big barrier. The barrier is and always will be a lack of safe space to ride a bicycle. It's the one ingredient that you need to become a cycling city. If you create a safe space to ride, regardless of the hills and regardless of the weather, people shift to bicycles. They like to ride, and once they get riding, they don't mind the hills, they don't mind the rain.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, I still want to drill down a little bit on this, on the financing and funding aspect, because I think that this is a critical issue for us. I mean, I just had a very interesting experience I got engaged with a company called Solar Zero, who are offering to put solar panels on my roof and give me a battery at no cost. And it took me a little while to work out what their business model was. And it's incredibly clever. They're arbitraging the varying price of electricity. The solar panels are part of it, but really the thing that makes it work for them and then also gives me a cheaper power bill is the battery. So they're charging the battery from the grid when the spot price is low and then discharging it when it's high, right? We have 3 electric bikes and 1 electric car to charge, so this is slightly related to transport tangentially. But so this is an incredibly clever piece of work. So this is not a government subsidy. This is not the government giving me money to put solar panels on the roof and get a battery. This is entirely the private sector who can both profit from this and help me decarbonise. Are we aware of similar real innovations, technological or finance innovations from the private sector that we can bring to this field, to urban form and transport? How about car share?
How about road user charging? Like, let's just shift it. We've already got something on the table that can take a look at, how we actually charge for using roads, and then be able to use that money to actually put it into other investments related to active modes. So that's one lever. And I don't really like to use that as a finance thing. That really is to be used to try to reduce VKT, but there's some opportunities there to help use that there.
So you're saying that's a demand management tool, principally?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Because we haven't really done any demand management, have we? Except for congestion, in a way, is its own form of demand management.
Yeah, and I think, there's some legislative things that need to be done as well. We don't need to have so many. I think car ownership here is like wild to me. You can tell I'm not from here, but the amount of cars that each person in a household has, I'm from New York, I've not seen that. And so I think actually going into reducing the number of cars in a household will be very helpful to the cause. And then also, but that's legislative things as well. But yeah, I think travel demand management is so important to actually getting us to where we need to be. And we haven't cracked that just yet. Not real levers, at least.
I was just going to jump on top of the question. I got a couple of comments. First of all, as we've gone through this process of electrifying the bus fleet and the ferry fleet, we're seeing a lot of interesting innovation come out as companies start to work through what the opportunity is. So for longer trips, this is particularly relevant for ferry fleets. If you want Great Barrier to the city, if Waiheke, Gulf Harbour, Pine Harbour, there's a lot of innovation in that space, which is really interesting, and it's not just about the sort of carbon fibre ferry, which they look awesome. It's the battery, it's the charging, it's the whole system. So some really interesting stuff happening there in terms of innovation to play out your solar equivalent. We're also looking at how we take the road space that we've got under our control is Auckland Transport, and think about, well, how do we use that and leverage the opportunity to provide for curbside charging on electric vehicles or electric bikes. So there's some really interesting stuff happening there. Time of use charging or congestion charging, that's going to be a big play. MOT's got draft legislation, so we've got a project specifically targeting that. So there's a range of things all designed around innovation, alternative sources of funding, and how we might use a more true pricing model for how our transport system is used. Time of use being one of them.
Yeah, so congestion charging or pricing as demand management it could be described as the white whale of urban transport, in the sense that everyone's pursuing it, but it's seems to be extremely difficult to get to land. The handful of cities that have it are, the evidence is inarguable. Stockholm, Milan, London, Singapore especially. Yet it always seems to be a few years away, doesn't it?
Well, we can't afford for it to be a few years away. If we're going to leverage the City Rail Link investment, then we need time of use charging. Otherwise, we've just spent $5 billion delivering a public transport system and aren't getting the leverage out of it. So we're very focused on that one. But I feel like this is more than an Auckland transport discussion.
Remembering the passcode on somebody else's iPad is quite an achievement. Okay, so look, maybe it's time for a quick fire round. I want each of you to say one thing, and this is a no-cost thing, that we could do in our city or any city in New Zealand that would get us moving in these directions that we've described. We start with you, Tim, and just go down the line.
What can we do for everything has a cost, Patrick? Nothing's free. Look, if I was starting out on how can we get towards delivering this, I think the work does need to happen internally. Both Council, Auckland Transport, Waka Kotahi. It's not a very exciting answer, but it would really be about getting everybody into the room and making sure that everybody is clear on what is required from them in order to deliver on this stuff. So that's... Thanks. Yeah, and it's internal work. It's internal work for all of our agencies collectively, with cross-party transparency, effectively, like agreeing that we're on the same page and we're going to make this happen. That's where I'd start, and it doesn't cost anything extra.
So many things could be said. I think the one thing that comes to mind is kind of going back to the way that we talk about climate. Really finding a better way to talk about this and really bring people on this journey, so that we're all clear on where we're headed if we don't start moving from aspiration into action. And that means that those that it tends to be a bit of a younger conversation, actually bringing everyone of all ages into the fold about how we talk about this, because it's important for all of us, no matter what age, to really get on board with this. So I would say, yeah, really being able to figure out how we talk about this, get people, together to talk about this, and not just leave it to consultation, to truly be active and real about how we talk about climate and how to solve it together. And I think that's the costless thing that we can do.
So like deliberative democracy processes.
That's correct, yeah. Active and deliberate.
Well, it's not no cost, but we could be more revenue neutral if we weren't so wildly subsidizing the cost of vehicle ownership and driving and giving away so much space on our streets to car storage. The reality is, we talked about, you mentioned car sharing and things like that. A personal vehicle spends 95% of its life parked in storage, not used. It's very expensive for people. But while it's driving, it's causing massive amounts of damage to the environment. It's a huge cost to people and to government. And so if we actually charge closer to the real cost of driving to drivers, sure, there would be some pain, but it would bring in a significant amount of revenue in terms of like congestion charging, time of use charging. Even the city of New York recently passed legislation to allow for congestion charging, so that's the direction we're moving. The revenue that's generated from those types of policies can be used and piled into better cycling infrastructure, public transport, things that are much more equitable for people to move around the city. So there's a cost somewhere, but it's getting put into coming from another source and reducing the cost from that source. So there's some neutrality in that, and so that's kind of what I would push for, is a better cost system.
Well, I came in tonight with Tiffany's key message that we have to change the conversation with our communities, but she said that, so I've just reinforced it. But I have a proposition for all the businesses in the room, including the three here: Auckland Council, WSP is no Arup. Sorry, oh, did I just say? And the University of Auckland. I thought it was, but then I had to double check. And any other employers in the room, of which maybe WSP is one of them. My proposition to the employers is I would like you to subsidise your employee transport, whether on the bus, the ferry or the train, or take the equivalent subsidy and put it into supporting active modes. And if you're willing to do that, I will do a deal with you.
Well, Dean, that's a great thing, and perhaps you could tell the audience about the real example that you've already got of this, which is Genesis. You can share that story?
Yeah, sure. So it wasn't an empty promise. It was a promise with intent. But what we see is that as organisations get their head around this, and they encourage their employees to move home to the office and back again, as a minimum, via public transport active modes, they're actually improving their own, well, they're reducing their own carbon footprint, which they need to report on. They're reducing their own operating costs because they need to provide less car parks. So there's an immediate cost reduction there. And so we also provide them a carbon counter. So this is a solution we're working up as part of, and we're offering and trialling with a number of entities to help encourage the shift from car dependency to being able to use the alternatives. So it's a very practical way for Auckland Transport to support the outcome that we've committed to, which are those emission reduction, VKT reduction targets, and increase in cycling and walking. So that's why I've given you my one very practical, no cost, low cost solution.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm aware of one business that moved from a suburban business park where every employee had a free car park to Wynyard Quarter, and AT worked with this business to come up with a transport plan which involved AT giving a discount on hot cards, if I remember correctly, and the employer subsidising on top of that, along with the employer, instead of building 100 car parks expensively under this building, they had secure bike parking and showers and a range of alternatives, and they've gone down to I think fewer than 10% of the numbers of car parks they had before. And the staff, there was some, bidding in period, but apparently it's landed incredibly well. Is that that's about a year ago now, I think.
Yep. So look, not only by individual, but we're doing it by precinct. So if you think Wynyard Quarter, that's a good example. Number of businesses in there, we measure with them, in partnership with them, what the carbon footprint is, what the public transport active mode component is. So I think there's a whole lot of opportunities in there, and I'm just saying if we're going to move the needle, then we've all got to change about how we do it. So we're up for that.
Just looking for more questions from you all. We've got a kind of related one, and this one's for everybody except Dean. You mightn't feel that shortly. So, Tim, Tiffany, and Timothy, the three T's. What three things would you do if you had Dean's power now?
This question is
It's from Anonymous, actually. It's from Anonymous. You know who you are.
Do you have any power, Dean? What's possible? Actually, Patrick's just reminded me we've got more Tims on the stage than women this evening, which is actually it's a twist of fate. And I want to give a shout out. We initially booked Frith Walker as our MC for the evening, and would have aimed for a bit more gender balance, and she was unable to attend. And Nico Elson was going to step in, and then unfortunately he was able to attend. And Patrick's come at the last moment to help us out. So I want to give that shout out to Patrick. Thanks for coming along. And highlight the fact that we have more Tims than women, which a little bit uneasy
But we're
about,
all
but it's where we came
Ts,
to. Exactly.
so that's awesome.
Exactly. There's some beautiful alliteration in the center of the stage. Dean's power. Yeah, I'd probably be quite sleepless, to be honest. Like, we're all a bit ruthless. But actually, let me give a little bit of framing first and foremost. I always work on the basis that if we want Auckland to be a great city, Auckland Transport needs to be a great organisation. And that actually requires us all to support Auckland Transport as much as possible. And I really look forward to working with Auckland Transport as it's developing under Dean's stewardship, effectively. Climate's obviously really important to me, but it's not the only consideration that you're faced with. But for me, it would be assembling a task force, effectively, to deliver this, the change that we need, and bring in expertise of people who are confident and capable with doing this. I'd really be looking for a whole team of people that can come up and say, yes, we understand the scale of the challenge, but we also understand how it is possible to get it done, and getting those people and putting them in charge of doing it. I think that's what I'd be focusing on if I was in that position.
You're supposed to name three.
Oh, three things?
No.
Any
all
number.
Good. It's all good. It's all good. I don't want to name three,
Whatever,
so it's fine.
whatever you got.
Let's see. Dean, I would, as a former AT employee, I would love to have a hop card, because you have actually over 15, close to 2,000 employees. I think if each one of them had a hop card, that'd be great. Just encourages people to use public transport more regularly, or even subsidized would be fine, you know? But again, this is just if I had your power, you don't have to consider this. What else?
You mean as part of a remuneration package?
Absolutely.
And presumably...
Because
the-
AT employees do not have hop cards that are paid for by AT, just so you know that. We paid for, yeah.
Auckland Transport has no car parks available
Yeah.
for staff, so
Yeah.
you have to figure out how you do it.
Yeah.
Public transport hop cards around, so every
Yeah.
employee does actually have a hop card. What we're talking about
Subsidized.
though is the ratepayer funds the hop card.
That's
And
right.
so far, we've got a ratepayer reluctance for Auckland employees, Auckland Transport employees, so
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we're really
So maybe you guys as ratepayers can support AT employees having hop cards that are subsidized, because that is a lot of employees, and being able to support the systems that we are planning for. I think it would also help for experience, understanding what it's like to be on the system.
Yeah, there's a phrase from the tech world which is you should eat your own dog food, right? It means if you work in a dog food factory, you should be tasting the dog food, right? So the argument behind that is not only to have AT and in fact wider council family using the system, but also that's a way of assessing the quality of it, right? Constantly by having every staff member out there using it. And I suspect if everyone was, although I actually happen to know your organisation, like mine, actually has a very high quantity of people that use PT to get to work. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's my wish.
So there wasn't a question.
I sample our produce every single day.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. Personally, I wouldn't want your job, Dean, so thank you for doing it. I mean, being the head of any organization, something like AT is, it's got to be a hard job. So anybody up for that task, wins points in my opinion. What I would like to see, and this isn't something AT can do, but I would like to see AT and Auckland Council have more control over what we can do with our own streets and what we can do with our own infrastructure. Because that's critical to making decisions that are important to local communities. If we have to wait for a higher body to weigh in on what powers we have over that space, it makes the process very slow and very laborious and very difficult. So that's not really something you can do, but if that power came down, I'd love to see that for local agencies.
I think we can take the first part of your comment as sympathy for Dean's position.
That's right.
Rather than a criticism.
I do want to respond to the sympathy, okay? I can't. I have got an awesome job, okay? It is extremely challenging. It is most interesting, but the only reason you do a job like this at Auckland Transport is because you believe in the outcome. And I've thought a lot about that before I took it on, and I believe in what Auckland can achieve. I believe I have a far deeper understanding now of the role of Auckland Transport in delivering on that outcome. We have this long-term stewardship role around a transport system that enables people to move as they choose, enables people to make those choices, that delivers on all the outcomes we've talked about tonight. That's what I'm up for every single day. That's why I love this job. So I don't need sympathy, but thanks for offering it. Some days I do. But still, having said that, it is an awesome job, high impact. And, these are important opportunities.
I think that's a fantastic place to end this. Really good. I'd like to thank all of you. Please thank our great panelists. And before I ask Richard to come up and to close us and keep us all spiritually safe, I guess just a quick summary is called for. We've heard about the need for vision and vision beyond the transport system, because it is merely a means to an end after all. So a vision for the city, and let's face it, this city should be at the top of that world's greatest city list. The natural attributes are just extraordinary. It's really what we've done to the place, and what we could do, that needs to lift its game. And it needs to be a convergent vision, right, that solves all of the problems rather than sort of chops them up and then trades them off against each other. And we need to take the whole community along, or be allowed to be taken along by the community. So we possibly need better and maybe more complex and more difficult to do processes for engaging with the public. But I'm certainly aware that some processes, like deliberative democracies, are working. The little trials that are happening, I think, through Auckland University, are proving to be really productive when people get in the room and get to really discuss the costs and benefits and the trade-offs in a sophisticated manner, rather than just a sort of yes-no situation. Often the public generate fantastic outcomes. So there's quite a lot of hope, and the fact that you're all here is part of that. So thank you very much for coming along. And now I'd like to ask Richard to come up and close us off.
Ladies and gentlemen, give a wonderful hand for our wonderful MC.